Good afternoon.
Hey, Burgess.
Hey, how you doing, Patrick?
I'm okay.
You know, Patrick, as we have in the other meetings, when I've asked you to weigh in, if we get a 20% return for the fiscal year, can you give them some idea how that would estimate how that would impact the funding ratio?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm working on it right now, actually.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, all.
How's everybody today?
All good. How about you?
Good.
Are we expecting anyone else? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Mr. Chambers. I understand you're an aviator.
Well, had a pilot's license for a long, long time. My dad was an aviator. He was a career Navy pilot, so not to be confused with a Navy pilot, but yeah, I like to fly.
Well, I'm one too. I was doing the RNAV approach a couple months ago on 2.7, and I noticed that the windsock was in bad shape.
Is it really?
Not now. I reported it, and they have a beautiful windsock now.
Well, I'm glad we took care of that promptly. We're trying at the airport. We've done quite a bit of renovations and alterations and modifications out there dating back to Alan's time as city manager and continuing. So yeah, we're proud of the airport.
Yeah, it's beautiful facility.
Burgess, I thought you were going to say you bought the new windsock.
Well, I haven't, no one's asked me to make a donation to the foundation there yet, but I certainly could do that.
I think
I'm
that's
certainly not bashful about asking, Burgess. Would you do that for us?
Well, when we're offline, let's talk about it.
What do you fly?
I've got an SR-22.
An SR-22?
Yeah, it's Cirrus.
Yeah. With the parachute?
Yes, sir.
My dad would call that a sissy airplane, but I wouldn't.
it's not if you need the chute.
Well, I'll tell you that company single-handedly changed the direction of single-engine piston general aviation.
Yeah.
I mean, they produce more airplanes in that category than all the other companies combined.
You see, Alan Bush would ride that airplane in because when you pull that chute, I understand that it destroys the airframe when the aircraft is totaled. Is that correct?
That's why you have insurance.
I know, but that's what I said. Alan, I don't think he could fight it to pull the ripcord on that chute if it was going to destroy the airplane. I think he'd try.
You're right. You're right. You're exactly right. The straps are underneath the gel coat, and so once the ballistic rocket that ejects the parachute, once the straps get taut, they rip out of the gel coat, and that's the end of the airplane.
Oh, I agree with you. I think it was an amazing innovation, and from everything I read and hear, it works. It was one of those ideas that sounded good, but it actually in implementation it worked out well too. But
yep. Anyway,
in any event, no, I was kidding. My dad he went in 6 months after Pearl and stayed in the Navy for 30 and flew all the glory fighters, Hellcat, Bearcat, Corsair, all the way up through the FJ and the A4 Skyhawk. And so, when you talk about pilots, I saw what a pilot was, and I knew I'm not that. So anyway,
great.
Different generation, different way of, everything.
Yeah.
Short story. I bought a Cessna 182 years ago in Heber Springs, Arkansas, and Dad was already 70 plus, and I got halfway or more home and got into really bad weather. I found an airport and got in. They shut the airport down literally, and the front hung over for like a couple of days. Anyway, I got to ride home. Called him up. He was living in Mariana, and I asked him if he would go get my airplane for me. And I'm thinking he's going to wait a few days. He was retired. And he'd go get the airplane. I'm not home long by car. And he calls me and says, your airplane's in Mariana. You can come get it when you get ready. And I said, how long has it been since you've flown IFR? He said, I don't know. A long time. And I said, and you filed IFR, just flew that airplane on home. And he said, son, that airplane's got equipment on it the Navy never gave me, like SWIPs, flip-flop radios and all that kind of stuff. He said, that airplane flies itself. And I said, yeah, that makes me feel good. Anyway, but
Great story.
All right. Well, can we call the meeting to order then? Miss Tammy can join if she comes on board, and she does. And if not, then we'll move on. So this is a meeting of the City of Palatka General Employees Retirement Plan, September 21, 2021. Can we have a roll call, please?
Alan Bush.
Here.
Don Holmes.
Here.
Brett Dennis.
Here.
Tammy McCaskill. And John Griffiths. Jonathan.
Okay, Mr. Griffith's dealing with some illness issues in his family. We have a quorum, so let's go ahead and move forward. I guess the first item of business would be approval of the minutes. Have those who are in attendance had an opportunity to read and review the minutes?
Yes.
Do I have a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We got a unanimous vote for approval. Item 3, Foster and Foster, Patrick Donlin Experience Study.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
All right, looks like Jill's got the controls there. And, you know, you guys approved an experience study a couple quarters ago to look at all the assumption, the actual experience, and then we could make any recommendations for assumption changes and show you the impact of those changes. So if you want to go, we can talk about the investment return first. That's probably the most significant assumption. So if you go to page 7 and 8, you go to page 7 first, I guess. But you can see on that page, the investment return assumption on the right-hand side. So you guys did an experience study 5 years ago. And when we did that study, you said, okay, let's gradually reduce that investment return assumption. And you did it in 5 10 basis point increments. So 10-116 valuation, we changed from 8% to 7.9. And we did that each year. And in the 10-1-2020 valuation report, we actually changed from 7.6 to 7.5. This is showing you the expected for the year end, which was 7.6. But now going forward, our assumption is 7.5%. And you can see the history that we have here. We only had history back to 10-196. And so over that period, 24 years, the average was 6.38%. But if I would have included more of the 1990s, you would be, you know, well over 7%. So it just depends on what time period you're looking at. At Florida Retirement System, they went to 7.0% assumption. And you know, a lot of boards are continuing, just as you have done, to try to lower that assumption. They get closer to FRS, because if you remember a few years ago, the state said, well, we want all plans in the state to use the same mortality assumption as FRS. And they could end up doing that with the investment return assumption at some point. So we're recommending boards, you know, gradually try to get to that 7%. So you may want to consider continuing that 10 basis points a year for the next 5 years, and that would get you to 7%. But right now, if we look at, you know, the projections that Burgess gives us for the GASB statements, we're projecting a return of about 8.16%, you know, based on long-term stock and bond returns and your current asset allocation. So we don't feel that 7.5% is unreasonable. So we're leaving it up for discussion. And so in the back of the report, we included changing it to both 7.25% or 7%, or leaving it at 7.5. So we can talk about that when we get to the end of the report. But does anybody have any questions about the investment return at this point? All right, well then.
And you're projecting then for the year ending 9/30/21, it's going to be 8 what?
Well, not for a year
No.
2021, when we look at long-term, you know, the next 40 years, you know, we're expecting about 8.1% based on the long-term historical averages.
Oh, I apologize. I thought you were giving us the return for the current year.
Yeah, the board had the assumption that we're using in the valuation report is we're expecting 7.5% for every year going forward. That's the current assumption that we have in the valuation.
Right, I understood that.
Well, here, let me clarify fiscal year 21. Through June, you're right around 19%. So as we speak, you're right around 20. So if the market holds for the remaining of this week and next week, you'll have about a 20% fiscal year return.
Goodness sakes, that's impressive.
That's awesome.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So if you go then the next assumption that we look at is salary increases, and that's on page 9. So when we do the valuation, we project what we think everybody's going to get for retirement benefits. You know, that's a big driver of how much we need to contribute each year. We want to make contributions every year so that when someone retires, we have enough money to pay all their retirement benefits. And their retirement benefit is based upon your final average salary. And so we look at their current salary, and then we project what we think they're going to get for increases each year for the next, 20 years or whatever. And so the last 10 years, the actual average salary increase is in kind of the middle column there, actual increase. And so you can see the actual increase has been about 10 or 11% for those first 2 years of employment. And a lot of times that happens, because the data that we get when someone's hired for the first valuation is just their snapshot at that time. And but a lot of times people increases those first 2 years. And then if you look at 2, 3, and 4 years, the average has been about 5.5%. And then if you look at anything over 5 years of service, the average has been 4.6%. And then that next column is the expected increase. That's our current assumption. We're expecting people with 0 years to get 8%, 1 year and up to get 5%. That was based on the experience study we did 5 years ago. And so in the right-hand column is what I'm proposing to change the assumption to. So we'll go to 10% for each of the first 2 years, then 5.5% for the next 3 years, and then 4.75% for anything over 5 years. And if you scroll down just a touch, you can see what that does to the funding requirements. They would actually go down slightly because, most people have 5 or more years of service, and we're changing that assumption from 5% to 4.75% for each year going forward.
We're about to throw a wrench in your calculations too. I guess you understand that already, right?
Yeah, and just like the investment return, we're looking at the next 20 or longer years. And so we're not looking at just what we expect this individual salary increases to be for 2021 or
Okay.
2022. We're looking at the long term. And I think that salary survey that the city is looking at right now is kind of a one-time issue. They want to catch up to the minimum wage that's going into effect, and they want to catch up to maybe what some other departments are around you. But I assume that that's going to be, this year and next year or whatever, a blip as far as the long-term salary increases go. Does that make sense?
It does. I have to be careful when I make generalizations about what is going to happen because I'm not sure yet what's going to happen. But if they accept the most recent proposal, we'd have an increase this year that would be significant, but then we still won't be at the minimum wage requirement. And that's going to take some funding in each of the next few years to get us to the minimum wage requirement for all of our employees. So it'll be as you put it, it may be a blip. I don't know. The job market right now is something that's hard for us to work with, but I understand your assumption. I mean, in your professions, you probably are a little bit more removed from what we're dealing with. But for instance, a commercial driver's license driver for our sanitation trucks that we now pay $14, $15 an hour to, that's $4 to $5 under what the going rate is right now in the industry. Waste Pro, Republic, all of those people are paying $20 an hour. So I don't know what our wages are going to do in the next couple, 3 years, but yeah, there's going to be a short-term blip for sure.
Yeah, and what'll happen is, every year we do the valuation and we look at the current salaries of each of the employees. So if the next 3 years they get big increases each year, then there's going to be an increased liability in the plan. But we do know that you've had an excellent return on investments this fiscal year. So when we do the valuation report, the liabilities might go up because of the salary increase, but then your investments might go up because of the good investment return. And that all works into the valuation each year.
Yep.
But the assumption that we're looking at here is what we think every year going forward, not just the next couple of years.
Right. I understand. And I appreciate that. Okay. Does anybody have any question about what you've seen or heard? You couldn't hear him at all, Alan?
Very little.
Can you hear it? Would you say something again, Patrick? Just test
Yeah,
1, 2, 3.
this is Patrick. This is a test.
Did you hear him, Alan?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we turned up the volume on our end and it helped some, Patrick. I appreciate it. Alan, basically what he was saying, and Patrick, you can jump in and correct me if I state it wrong, but these averages that you see on page 9 are based upon long-term projections. And while they expect a short-term increase, perhaps in our salaries in the next 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, as we try to reach the minimum wage that we're mandated right now to reach by 2026, I guess it is. In the long run, it's expected that things will balance out and average out to the point that these returns are not inaccurate and not in any way flawed in the or don't create a defect or flaw in the calculations. So Alan, that we've done a salary study. The commission is probably going to adopt something Thursday night. They've already adopted a plan for purposes of a placeholder in our budget that would increase our salaries by about $440,000, as I recall, roughly speaking, Jill. Depending upon what's accepted Thursday night, the numbers should not be above that amount. It could be a little bit less than that amount in terms of our overall salaries. And then we've still got the issue of meeting the $15 an hour minimum wage by 26. We will, as of Thursday night, if this gets passed, we will have no one making below 13 an hour. So we will have the 13-hour threshold accomplished with the understanding and full knowledge that we'll still have to phase in some increases, but trying to hit everybody at 15 at one time was just not something that was feasible from a budgetary perspective. So we will have a minimum of 13 for everybody. And then there will be overall adjustments in other categories and things, but
What is it now?
what's that?
The average minimum.
The minimum wage right now, I think, is 11 even. Yeah. And so we're at 13, but we've got to be at 15 by 2026. Unless something changes. So but I understand you're looking at a long-term projection, and you can't necessarily be swayed by the short-term wage and salary fluctuations that we see, and
Exactly.
quite frankly, not to say this too loud, but depending upon how things go, you could see us franchising out our sanitation department, which would have an impact on our wages, a significant impact on our wages. So that would be something that I'm not advocating right now, but it just depends upon where we end up in trying to hire drivers. We have 9 total CDL drivers in the city right now, and we're 5 short as of Friday. We're down 5, have 5 vacancies. And what we're seeing around us, and it can be a number of things, and everyone else I'm sure is looking at this from a larger perspective, but it could be the unemployment, the stimulus. I don't know. I just know that hiring CDLs right now it's a challenge. Temp agencies are getting no applications for CDL drivers to work on from the temp agencies. So it's just one of those things that.
Well, that's been on the news a lot. Everybody's in the same boat.
Yep. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to digress.
Oh, no problem. So if we want to go then to the retirement rates on page 11.
Okay.
So obviously, your benefit is going to be different if you retire at age 50 than if you retire at age 65. And so that affects the funding requirements to the plan, when people are retiring. And the table there shows you over the last 10 years, the ages of the retirees. And so 50 to 54, you had 14 retirements in the last 10 years. There was 97 exposures, people that could have retired at age 50 to 54. So that was about a 14.4% rate. And then 50 to 55, you can see 56 to 59. And so you can see the actual rates there, which aren't terrible. And then the expected rate is the current assumption. And then the proposed rate is our proposed assumption. So, more people are retiring 50 to 54. So we're going to bump that up to 15%. A little less people are retiring at 55 than we originally expected. So we're changing that to 20. And so if you scroll down a tiny bit, Jill, then you can see that, if we make those changes, on average, people are retiring a little bit later. And then we have a little more time to invest their money and fund for those benefits. So the funding requirements would go down by about 1.3% of payroll if we made those changes to the retirement assumption. Anybody have any questions about the retirement assumption?
No.
All right, then the next one is withdrawal rates on page 12. And that's people that terminate before retirement. And obviously, if everybody terminates before they're vested, well, then you don't need to put in any contributions because those members just get a refund of their own contributions and the city wouldn't have to make any contributions. So again, it really matters our assumption about when people are going to terminate and how many people are going to terminate. And right now we use an age-based assumption, but what we've found for almost all of our plans is that turnover is more based on credited service, how long you've been there. At the beginning, you might not like your job, you might not like the people you're working with, you might move. There's a lot of things that can happen when you first start in a job. And so you can see that there in the actual rates. People in their first year terminated at a rate of about 22%. So 1 in 5 people terminated in their first year here at Palatka. And then years 1 through 5, they terminated at a rate of about 13.5%. Years 6 through 10, 14%. Years 11 through 15, 8%. 16 to 20 was only 5.3. Once they're established here, they've been here 10 years, most of them work until retirement. So you can see on the right-hand side what our proposed assumption would be for various credited service buckets. 20% for that first year, 14% for each of the next 9, 10% from 11 to 15, and 7.5, 16 to 20, and nobody 21 plus. And so again, it's a little bit more turnover than the current assumption. And so if you assume more turnover, then that decreases the funding requirements. So it would go down about 1% of payroll if we make that change. If you go to page 13, you have a very low assumption right now for disabilities. The plan expected 2.6 disabilities over those 10 years, and you had no disabilities during that time. So we're not proposing any change to the disability rate assumption. So then if you go to the last page, we kind of put all that together for you. And you can see if we just change the investment return assumption to 7.25, that would go up by about 2.1% of payroll, the city's funding requirements. If we go to 7%, it would be 4.4% of payroll. And you can see the increase in the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. And then the salary increases, retirement rates, and withdrawal rates, all of those reduced the funding requirements individually. And so if you did all of those changes and kept the assumption at 7.5, then the city's costs would go down about 2.6% of payroll. And if we combine that with the 7.25 or the 7%, you can see the impact there. So now I guess I'll open it up for questions and discussion, and hopefully the board can make some decisions on what they want to do with the assumptions. And realize that any changes that you make now, we would put that into the 10/1/2021 valuation report that you'll get in March. And that'll affect the city's funding requirements for the year that starts 10/1/2022. So any changes you make are not going to affect the city in the current budget. It would be for the budget they're going to do next summer.
So just a question, when we had our discussion a few minutes ago, we talked about a 0.1% increase each year to get us down to 7.0, but I don't see anything here for 7.4. I see.
Well, 7.4, the increase to the, just because of the investment return would be a little less than 1%. And so that combination of 7.5 is a 2.6% of payroll reduction. It would be more like a 1.6% of payroll reduction if we go to the 7.4%.
All right, well, Brett, do you have any questions?
Just want to make sure that I understand. If we were to make these changes, the cost to the city of this plan will go down, is what I heard.
If we do not change the investment return assumption, that's correct, yes.
If you change the investment return assumption by lowering it, then the city's required contribution goes up a little.
How much?
We'd have to go back to that earlier table there.
Well, if we go to 7.25, this cost would still go down slightly. Line 7 in the combination there. If we went to 7%, the city would go up about 1.6% of payroll.
Alan, you have questions? Well, can we have some thoughts from you guys, the experts, as to you're seeing what we're seeing, and I understand that it's not your decision to make, but you certainly have some informed and educated thoughts about what would be a wise decision. Can you give us the benefit of your thoughts? Well,
from my perspective, I definitely think you should do the salary increases, retirement rates, and withdrawal rates. I definitely think the board should make those three changes because, we've looked at all the experience and that seems to be the best estimate going forward for those particular assumptions. Then the only question is the investment return assumption. And, I'm fine really if the board wants to continue their current path of doing 1/10 of a base, 10 basis points each year for the next 5 years. I think that's going the direction the state wants you to go. We've gotten a lot of letters from the state recently where they feel like the investment return should be between 5.5% and 6.5%, which seems ridiculous to me. But, I think if you're just gradually doing a little bit each year, that would keep the state off your backs. And so that would be fine with me, but I'll let Burgess talk more on the investment side.
Well, if the board will permit me, when we get to my report, you'll see on page 1. And we looked at the last 40 years and 7.25 is very much attainable. And quite frankly, if one wants to make more money, they just have to have more equity exposure. And you've got plenty right now, and I think you got enough to make 7.25. But I would suggest that you begin what Patrick is suggesting, to tiptoe downward towards 7. You can talk about this every year, and you can stop it at 7.25 if you want. So you don't have to make a decision today to go to 7.
So it was earlier suggested, and I guess I've hung up on that we might think about going to 7.4 right now, with the idea that depending upon how things are next year, we might go down to 7.3 or 7.25 or whatever. But by going to 7.4, we'd be signaling our desire to move down towards a 7% number that everybody's talked about, and yet we wouldn't be shocking the system.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
Okay.
From a fiduciary standpoint, I think that's certainly would be considered a best practice. You never want to put additional cost on the plan sponsor that you don't have to, but doing it now is going to be cheaper than doing it later. And this gradual reduction, which does gradually increase that aspect of cost, is much better than being confronted with the necessity of doing a large reduction at one time, particularly, when the city has not planned for it in its long-term fiscal planning. Patrick, may I ask you a question? Is this for, if they were to adopt this recommendation to lower it, would this be for the fiscal year that begins next Friday?
No.
Or a year from now?
A year from now.
Then you definitely want to do this. This gives the city more than ample time to consider this when they go to their budget planning, which generally in the municipal world is an all-year process. But when they start giving it a serious look, towards the end of the year, looking ahead to fiscal 23, I think now is the time to make this decision. And it's consistent with the observations of your actuary. You're never wrong deferring to a reasoned position from your expert. You're essentially, your decision making is immune legally, and from my experience, it's immune in the court of public opinion as well.
Okay, so then are we in order to ask for a motion, or is it premature? Do we need to wait for Burgess's report before we make a motion on the assumed return rate that we're going to work with for purposes of determining contributions for fiscal year 2022?
I don't think it's from a legal standpoint. I don't think it's premature, because this is part of the actuary's recommendation to continue on the gradual reduction of the assumed rate of return is, you can always raise it back up if Burgess continues to hit home runs. So, which he has promised me he will do every year for at least the next 35 years.
All right.
So you can always raise, I've known him forever. So, and our children went to law school together. So, and I've known his wife longer than he has. So back to the actual story. I think they're somewhat disconnected. Burgess's report tells you whether the current investment policy statement that you have and your current asset allocation is in the right place. But what Patrick is telling you is what's the most prudent course for long-term planning. So
Okay, then, so with
that's why I think the motion's in order.
so would the motion then be to accept the assumptions or the projections and calculations that are
Well,
contained?
I think you could make a motion that with the October 1, 2021 valuation report, to make all the recommendations outlined in the experience study with a 7.4% investment return.
I concur. Actually, your motion could be to adopt the recommendation of the actuary as stated.
I make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the actuary as stated.
7.4. 7.4 would be the assumed rate of return, with the idea that's the investment return assumption that our contributions are going to be based upon, that the city's contributions are going to be based upon, would be effectively would be set at 7.4% effective 10/1/2022.
Where do you got earlier page where they refer to that?
They referred to that in our conversation today. They talked about if we would go down, it would be prudent, considered prudent to step down at a 0.1% rate towards the 7.0 number. Then depending upon what the actual return is and so forth and so on, might stop at 7.25, might keep on going down to 7.0, who knows? But right now, to avoid basically a significant budgetary change for 2022, just go to 7.4%.
The way things are going countrywide, I don't think you can count on a hell of a lot to go at the lower end of it.
Well, I'm sure not the expert, but I guess from my perspective, I feel comfortable in relying upon what the suggestion has been. I mean, that's,
My understanding is the state's requiring us to make some move down, and we're making the smallest possible move down.
I don't know that they're requiring it, but I think what we're hearing is that they're certainly indicating that they believe that's prudent. And yet our actual return this year is in excess of 20%. So,
I saw that. I thought it was fantastic.
but in order to be, and as they say, it's better for us to do this gradually than be faced with the prospect of having to make some substantial change later on. So, I mean, I'm good with the 7.4%, which is what's been recommended. Okay, so that's a motion you made.
Motion I made, yes, sir.
Would you, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, gentlemen, does that accomplish what we need to accomplish in that regard?
That's perfect. Thank you. I got my marching orders now.
Agreed.
Okay.
I don't know if it's on the agenda, but the board at the last meeting had asked for a study about a one-time cost of living increase. Looks like Joe put it up on the screen. Did you guys want to talk about that also?
Right. I know we discussed that at the last meeting. Is that, do we have that in
It's a
our,
loose
it's a loose?
page, yeah. physical on it anyway.
Now, one of these is not a COLA, it's just a one shot deal.
Through the chair, Patrick, is this an ad hoc COLA?
Yes.
So it's a what? So you're writing a check one time equal to 5% of the retiree payroll.
Well, I mean, they're going to get a one-time increase in their benefit. So that benefit increase will be permanent,
Oh, it's a permanent increase. Okay,
but it's not an annual increase.
got it.
So basically, you know, the retirees haven't had a cost of living adjustment for a long time. I can't remember what it was. I think it's been about 15 years
Wow.
since they've had an increase. And so, you know, we looked at providing them an increase and we did two different scenarios. One is, you know, everybody would get the same 5% increase in their benefit. And there was no magic to the 5%. I just picked 5%. And the cost, you know, is proportional. If the city wanted to give a 1% increase, then the cost would be 1/5 of what I show here.
Mhm.
If I wanted to do a 10% increase, it would be twice as much as what's shown here. And then the other one takes into account how long they've been retired, because cost of living for somebody who retired 2 years ago hasn't gone up very much, but the cost of living somebody who retired 15 years ago has.
Right.
So the second scenario there, it would be 1% for each year that they've been retired with a maximum of 10%. So if someone's been retired 10 years, they would get a 10% increase. If they've been retired 1 year, they would get a 1% increase. And again, if you wanted to make it a 0.5% for each year, then it would be half the cost that I show there. So
All right, so to make sure I understand this, for scenario one, right now we're saying that the percent of annual payroll that our pension contribution is the city's contribution stated as a percent of annual payroll right now is 35.6. If we went to scenario one, it would rise to 38.5. And if we went to scenario two, it would rise to 40.1.
exactly, yes.
Okay.
And you half that to, what you said, it would cut this in half then the amount, right?
If you went to a 2.5%, you mean?
Yeah.
I assume that's correct. So the difference is 110,000 for, it'd be an increase of 110 for option one and an increase of 170 for option two annually, correct?
Correct.
And this would be starting October 1.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I did the study, is that the effective date would be October 1, 2021. But the cost isn't going to be much different if you did it effective April 1 of next year. Or, you know, there's not a huge change to the costs if you change the date of the effective date.
I'm just, I mean, this is not budgeted is what I'm thinking about.
Right.
And 110,000 doesn't sound like much, but with our budget as tight as it is this year, it would definitely probably start my finance director's head spinning. Do you disagree, Jill? So,
Not been an increase since I left 13 years ago. We used to go in and we take a look at what we had available and give them some periodically. It didn't have annually or even every other year or every 3 years. You look at the budget and see what you can afford to do.
and you know, I'm not at all questioning the legitimacy. I'm just, I for one would be unprepared right now at this minute to vote for either, because it does have budgetary implications that have not been discussed. And that's maybe our fault, my fault, who's ever, for not trying to get this put together earlier so that it could be taken into account in the budgetary process, but we're set to adopt. We've already adopted the budget tentatively. And I guess we have a final adoption set for October, or is it tomorrow? So to throw another 110,000 at them, I don't know. We can talk about it, but as I said, it would be something would have to come out of reserves. There's no place else to take it right now.
Chairman, would it be something to recommend for inclusion in the fiscal 23 budget? Now, actuarially, you couldn't pass the ordinance until October of next year in order to avoid sticking it in this year's actuarial valuation. Because as Patrick would tell you, if you adopted it now, or if you adopted it before October 1 of next year, meaning the City Commission, if they adopted it before October 1, you'd have to either add it into your valuation right now or amend your current valuation. And that would put that 110,000 or 170 or what other number in between 0 and something that you would recommend. But it seems that since we've been talking about fiscal planning, it certainly would allow the city mothers and fathers to have enough time to consider its implications going forward. And I'm sure it would be just as welcome from the retirees, particularly the older ones, who at 3%, they're at 3% inflation, they're probably upside down 45%, Patrick, on their purchasing power in 15 years.
Right.
So something that helped out your older ones to a greater degree immediately than your younger ones, your more recent retirees who've been beneficiaries of higher salaries, better economic times, might be the right recommendation. And actually, given what's here, you may want to study by looking at the actual impact on your retiree population where the biggest bang for the buck is. So I would tend to agree with the chair's observation that springing this on the city, 24 hours before the final adoption of the budget would not be a welcome visit. And I think it'll get a much warmer reaction when the fiscal 23 budget planning goes on.
Yeah, I'm afraid that as worthy as the cause might be, I'm having a hard time with the prospect of as much conversation as we've had about the budget and the salary study and the survey, and we're going to get back into that tomorrow night because they still haven't adopted a final plan of the salary and compensation plan for the next year. I'm afraid that if we broach the subject of a cost of living increase or an increase, whatever you want to call it, for retirees this late in the day, I'm going to get some negative reaction.
And then I think prudence would dictate that you take Patrick's report under consideration and schedule it for revisit it on your agenda after the first of the year, whatever your first meeting is after the first of the year, which is when.
Okay, let me ask a question. Let's say, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but let's say that.
Anytime.
Let's say that we go a few months down the road and things work out well, ad valorem goes up, which it may, the way things are happening in Palatka right now. Sales tax does good and everything is going well. And we're actually, ahead of the game or the power curve on our budget. We're talking about, the fiscal year landmark or as a significant date. Is there something that would prohibit us from 6 months from now taking this up?
No. So let me tell you how that works as far as the funding. So you could do April 1 of 2022. Okay. So let's say you look at this and you bring it back up in December, and then you talk to the city about it and they're willing to do it, and they do it for April 1, 2022. If they do that, then the city has to start funding for it October 1, 2022.
New budget.
We would do an impact statement. We would include it in the 10/1/2021 valuation that determines the funding requirements starting 10/1/2022. And it would be included in there. So you can make the changes anytime, and no matter when you make it, the city has to start funding for it on the following October 1st.
Okay, that answers my question. I appreciate that.
We could put you in the next budget year.
Right. So I think then, you know, I don't know, what's the committee, what's the,
It doesn't impact me like it does a lot of these low-income retirees. There's some of them with the inflation and God knows what's down the road. They're hurting.
I think the move to help the older people who've been off the plan, on the plan the longest makes more sense. The percentage increase hurts a bit. Maybe we consider 0.5% instead per year to try to even that out some, but giving more to folks that this inflationary rise of cost of living has affected the most makes more sense to me.
yeah. So what we'll do then, if by consensus is, if nobody has an objection, is we'll not raise this at tomorrow night's meeting, and we'll not plan on this being something that's effective for fiscal year 2022. We'll plan on it being something that comes up and is effective for 2023. Is that right?
Yeah, the following budget year.
Next budget year, yeah. Okay, then, and I probably will start, if nothing happens, and, we'll probably look at bringing it up in the spring, so there's time for people to digest it,
Absolutely.
think about it, and, make plans that way.
The ones that contact talking to me, if they want to come to a commission meeting, I'll invite them to come down and appeal to the commission.
Sure.
Feel like
Sure.
they're being.
Yeah, I understand, and I agree with you. I totally would understand that. Okay, is that a
That's all
sufficient?
for me, and I'll stick around and in the background in case anything comes up.
Thank you
Okay.
for your work on this,
Thank you.
Patrick.
No problem.
Mr. Chambers. I think, I don't have my agenda in front of me now, but I think you'd be up next, wouldn't you?
Burgess, you're muted.
Thank you, Bob. Now, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, they
And
were
this-
enjoying the presentation more though before.
Mr. Bush, don't forget to speak closer to the mic if you would.
His mic's not on. That would help too. Turn your mic on there, Alan. Push the button.
Now,
Thank you.
um,
Now,
I'm sorry,
So-
what was your question?
no, there's no question. I just observed earlier that I couldn't hear you, but I could hear everybody else. So where we left it at the last meeting was that I would maintain an overweight to equities relative to the target, but within the ranges permissible. And that didn't require board action. I took on that responsibility. And that my office at the appropriate time would rebalance back to the equity target allocation, which is 60%. Well, we did that in August, on August 16th. And really, it just so happens, since we've done that, the equity markets have softened, and we've seen quite a bit of softening just this month. So that's all cleaned up nicely for you going into the new fiscal year. And that overweight to equities helped you outperform the target allocation more recently, and it's helped you garner somewhere around a 20% return so far this fiscal year. And if that works out, if we can hold it, that'll be the best fiscal year return in 17 years.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, I don't want to scare you too much, but the stock market is extraordinarily overvalued. The price to earnings multiple of the S&P is about 35 times earnings. And the long-term average has been about 16 times. And if you go back and look at the data, it's the PE ratio is only been this high 4% of the time. So 96%, I would say, probability that we're going to see the stock market go down. That could be mitigated by earnings remaining robust and continuing to grow. So that would help keep the PE from collapsing. I should add that the emergency order by the FDA last year to allow Pfizer and then Moderna to begin dispensing the vaccines really saved us. It saved us from entering into a very, very deep economic abyss. So the credit goes to the scientists and who've been working on this mRNA technology actually for 30 years. This is nothing new, but the acceleration and the commitment by the US and other governments around the world to buy those vaccines ahead of time and pay cash up front, help these companies procure these vaccines as quickly as possible. So that's why we're not in a depression right now. It's the vaccines. And what we spoke about earlier was the anticipation at the end of last year and going into the first quarter of this year that the economy would open up and people would start to spend money again, that would drive the economy. The economy is measured by the GDP is growing at about a 5% rate. And if you look at the past 25, 30 years, the GDP grew at about 2% a year. What's happening is this, two things. Not only has Congress been generous, but the Federal Reserve, the Fed, has borrowed an enormous amount of money from its 500 member banks. They go to those banks, and whether the banks want to loan them their reserves or not, they take the money, they pay interest on it, and they use that money in the open market operations to keep interest rates low, to keep mortgage rates low. Now, they've already spent $4.5 trillion since January, and they may spend another $1.5 trillion before the end of the year, which would push that up to $6 trillion, unprecedented. And I'll leave this with you. The amount of loans of the Fed member banks outstanding, collectively to the Fed exceeds the number of loans they have out to private borrowers. But chew on that one for a few days, and that'll keep you awake at night. We have a very expensive equity market. We have an expensive bond market thanks to the OMO, open market operations, and we have an expensive real estate market. Everything's expensive. And I think what we've seen in the past is the Fed does not preempt market bubble crashes. It simply stands by to be helpful in the event of a crash to bring things back in order. Now, how long this will continue to expand out, it's anyone's guess, but I don't think it's going to pop tomorrow. But there will be some kind of a catalyst in the next couple of years that will, I think, scare people, and you'll see equities go down. Now, the way this program is set up, and I've been doing this for 35 years, is when we do see equity pullbacks, the bonds, which are 40% of the securities here, we use the bonds to rebalance back into equities. So we'll sell bonds that have actually go up in value when we have equity market sell-offs. We take those proceeds and buy back into the equity markets. We did that aggressively in 2009. It worked out well. We started doing it in March. And we did a little pivot here actually in April of last year. So we're prepared to do it again when that time happens. Any questions about that so far?
My only question, I heard some news yesterday, of course, that could be dangerous, but an issue in China in real estate that's affecting our markets. Does that worry you at all?
Everything worries me. And it, worries me immensely. That company is the largest real estate developer operator in the world, and they're 50% partners with the Chinese government.
Yeah.
And they've gotten in arrears with their lenders, with their bondholders, with their contractors. They owe money to everybody. So they're trying to sell stuff, raise money. And what you're saying is correct. But I think the Chinese government is committed to keeping these people solvent. So I think that bad news will pass.
Okay.
So I heard what you said, and I think I followed you. It was logical. I guess my question is to those of us who aren't as invested in, well, who aren't, I guess, as deeply involved in this as you are, what's your bottom line? Are you saying that we should shift our equity to bond ratio?
No, I wouldn't say that, because Dr. Sharp, who won the Nobel Prize in this area back in the 60s, he'd roll in his grave. So market timing is not going to work here. The problem with it is that you don't know when to get back in, and when you get back in, it's too late.
Yeah.
We're ready to go. We have plenty of dry powder. I mentioned to you, we have lots of bonds here. They're the liquidity that you need. This balanced approach you saw on page, I haven't showed you page 1 yet. Go to page 1, Jill. There it is. Those four different line graphs represent different time periods. The yellow one is 40 years. And those little dots represent different allocations, stock and bond allocations. You can see there what the 60-40 looks like. That's where you've been all these years. But it works. We don't want to be preemptive and try to guess what's going to happen. But when the market does sell off, we're in a good position because of the liquidity amongst the bonds to get back into those equities at a cheaper price. And that's the way I've done it my entire career. And that's, I think, the best course of action here.
Okay, so go ahead and scare us to death and then tell us not to do anything different, right?
Well, I you pay me to be honest, and I'm in the cockpit here with you, and there's bad weather ahead. There's no question about it. We just don't know how far away it is or how long it's going to take for us to reach it, but it's out there, and everybody's worried about this. It's not just us. It's all these boards and consultants. Even Patrick worries about it, I hope. But I think the point of this chart is to show you that over the long term, that a 60-40 proposition asset allocation will deliver between 7 and 8% per annum. Okay, long term, it works. I've done this my entire career, and I think it'll continue to work for you.
Okay.
Good.
But if you were close to retirement, you had a bunch of money in stocks, you'd take it out right now.
Well, the problem is mortality. If you were able to live another 100 years, it wouldn't matter. You could keep it in stocks.
Yeah, that death thing gets in the way, doesn't it?
It does. Just be careful. Let's see. Let's go to page 4, please. You had a very good quarter. The program earned over $1 million, 4.9% net. A nice run here with growth in the REITs, mid-cap growth, 1 year rolling up almost 5 million. These are net numbers, 25.8% net of fees, head of the model. The 3-year number, And then you look at the 10-year number, and this is data that we spent a lot of money to do right. Net is 8.2% per year. So your 10-year number, I think Patrick had a longer term number, but your 10-year number achieved the goal, which 10 years ago was 8%. Patrick did mention, or Bob did, that the FRS is now at 7% and likely to head on down into the 6s. The table there summarizes the changes that we made back in April. The board approved us migrating some of these index products into, or some of these are managed products too, into lower priced or lower cost share classes. That these moves will save you about $20,000 a year. And those have all been done. I'd like to take you to page, let's see, go to page 15, please.
I just, for
Yes,
just a second, to say that this plan gained 1.1 million in 1 quarter, that's fantastic.
Well,
Isn't
you can thank you can thank the Congress for being generous, and you can thank the Federal Reserve aggressiveness in keeping rates down, and that's why.
Way back when I went, my major was finance in undergrad, and I can never forget one of my professor's statements that's probably was not original at all, but he simply said, "What the stock market giveth, the stock market taketh away."
Yeah. Well, it's true. I guess he wasn't very enamored with the stock market. That's why he's a professor.
Well, that was a different time. I know that was a different time, that was back when, things were a lot different in terms of the Dow Jones and everything else. And yeah,
Well, when I first got into this business back in the early 80s, a lot of money was invested in mortgage products that were issued by insurance companies that were earning 6 to 8% a year because they were tied to, at that time, long-term mortgage rates. And they had no sensitivity to the stock market. And Bob Clauser remembers those days too. And we lost all of that when the insurance companies decided they weren't going to accept fiduciary responsibility at the plan levels, and they got out of that business. So we've had to rely on equities all these decades to drive the returns needed for these benefits. There's no way to get these returns anywhere else except in the stock market. Certainly can't get them in bonds, as you know.
right.
Let's go to page. Is that take care of your question?
Yes.
Okay, page 15. I want to draw to your attention within the domestic equity category of the Virtus, the Ceradex small cap value product. Up until maybe, I don't know, 3 years ago, three years ago, they were pretty much in line with the index, but they have since fallen further and further behind. And what I'm recommending is that we replace this initially by 50%, simply go directly into the Russell 2000 index. We can buy the index through a Fidelity product that has an expense ratio of 5 basis points per year, where Ceradex is charging you about 90. So this is another, this will save you another $7,500 a year in fees and bring the returns back in line with the index. The reason why I wouldn't recommend taking all of it out is because I think this is a good firm, and I like having that complement of active and passive, especially in the small cap space. So that's something to consider for adoption.
Right. So you heard the recommendation.
How much did you say to move to it?
50%. So it looks like it'd be around 450,000.
from Virtus to Fidelity.
Yeah, it's a Fidelity, and the symbol on that ticker is FISVX. If you can look it up yourself, that would be the recommendation.
That's the Virtus small cap going directly to the Russell.
Yeah, one half of it into the Russell Index 2000 Value Index, which is represented by the Fidelity. There's a Fidelity fund that replicates the Russell 2000 Index.
Did you hear that, Alan?
Yeah.
Okay, by consensus, is everyone in agreement with that recommendation?
Yeah.
I am. So call that if you want a formal vote, we can take it.
Yes, I would suggest you do a vote.
I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendation as stated.
That's going from taking 50% of the Virtus small cap fund and transferring it over into the Russell fund, or the fund that mirrors the Russell fund. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that would be the Fidelity Small Cap Value Index Fund.
Fidelity Small Cap Value Index Fund. That's the motion.
Yes, it is.
Have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. If you go to page 16, another little tweak I would suggest. The Schwab US REIT, you go back down and there it is. Wait a minute. Page 16. Go to the next page down. One more down. Stop. You have to have the hands of a surgeon to do this sometimes. Uh-oh. Here we go. The Schwab US REIT ETF was designed to mirror the Russell US REIT Index. And it did until a couple of years ago. It started to fade off. And as we drilled into this deeper, we found out that what Schwab did was they reconstituted the makeup of their ETF, and they drifted away from the Russell US REIT Index. Well, we can buy the Russell US REIT Index. It does have an expense ratio of 50 basis points. The Schwab is cheap. It's 7. That was one reason we liked it. But you can see the difference between like the 1 year and the comparisons here are much greater than 0.5%. So my recommendation would be to move all of the Schwab US REIT ETF into the Wilshire, the Spider Dow Jones REIT ETF. The symbol is RWR. And that will bring the returns back in line with the underlying index.
So that's moving all of the Schwab US REIT ETF funds into the Wilshire.
Yeah, it's called the Spider Dow Jones REIT ETF, and the symbol is RWR, Romeo Whiskey Romeo.
This is a new one, not on our chart, correct?
This is new for you. You don't see it here because you haven't invested in it before.
Okay, so that's a recommendation. Do
Okay,
I have a mo-
we're taking the Schwab on this and shifting it down into Wilshire US REIT index.
That's right. That's right. I mean, let me say it this way. The Wilshire US REIT Index is the investment policy bogey for this asset class, the REITs. And the only vehicle that's out there right now that replicates the Wilshire US REIT Index returns the best is my recommendation. That Schwab no longer tracks it very closely. As you can see from the numbers.
So you said its symbol was RWR, but it is actually called the Dow Jones.
Yep, Dow Jones REIT ETF, which stands for Exchange Traded Fund.
All right, so the motion would be to take all the funds out of the Schwab US REIT ETF and transfer it to the Dow Jones REIT ETF. That
Correct.
would be the motion.
Yes.
Yep.
Anybody want to make a
I
motion?
recommend it.
Alan makes the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, good. Let's see. Let's go now to page 21, please. Now, this kind of relates to page 1 because those different allocations that whether it be 100% equities or 70 or 60%, over time, the higher allocation to equities gives you a higher expected return. And you can see that 45-degree slope, called the capital market line, from the crosshairs, gives you a sense of the balance here between all bonds, which is that plus symbol down below in the lower left quadrant, and then the more risky asset classes in the northeast quadrants. Now, what we have here is a 60-40 balance. If we wanted to move into riskier territory to drive and maybe another 0.5% or 0.75% expected return over time, you would simply roll that blue dot up that 45-degree slope. Now, what I've done here for you in the last year or so is I've been doing it voluntarily a little bit, maybe a couple millimeters, keeping you slightly above the target, but within the 70% ceiling. So finally on page 22, this goes back the last 17 years and shows you the history of how the plan has, these are gross returns. The net was about, you can drop about 0.5% off over historically to give you the net return. You can see that in 2012, the gross was 20%, or let's say 19.5% net. And we're right about 19 now on the left-hand side through June 30. I think you're closer to 20 actually, because of the way we did the rebalance. So it looks like we could very well be right in line with the best, well, equal the best return the last 17 years, which was fiscal year 2012.
Did you take a vacation in 2015, Burgess?
2015, the Fed did that to you.
Must have been asleep.
The Fed made some remarks about raising interest rates, and this all happened in actually in September of 2015. He spooked everybody in the market. Then when he decided he made a mistake, changed his mind, the market went back up the following year.
08 speaks for itself, doesn't it?
It does. And by the way, what's fascinating about 08 is reading the Fed minutes of 2007. A lot of this stuff was really a kind of secret, but all this stuff has come out. The Federal Reserve had no idea what was about to hit. There was nothing in the minutes in the summer of 2007 about any problems ahead. Nothing.
Yeah.
They seemed oblivious. And frankly, I think they still operate the same way today. They spend a lot of time with string instrument tea parties and hosting foreign dignitaries. They still do it the same way.
All right.
All right.
Tell us what
so-
you think about the Fed, would you, Burgess?
Listen, they have the best record keepers, the best mathematicians, the best software, the best computers. They have lots of PhDs. But I think, as I said earlier, I think they've blundered here in the past, but they do the best they can.
Yeah.
And we all do the best we can. And that's pretty much all I have for today. And is there anything else you'd like to, Mr. Bush, do you have any questions, sir?
Well, yeah, on a personal level, I have everything in equities. And I want to make it, I'm scared to death of what's going on up there in Washington right now. What I want to do is shift it to something a little safer, bonds. What would you recommend amongst them?
You know, we
Oh.
are on record now. In all
I'll
fairness.
tell you
I'm
what,
talking about for
Mr.
this.
Bush,
We went to the,
Alan, you have my cell number because you called me the other day about, which we were talking about the mountain houses. You want to give me a call? I've got some, having some hand surgery tomorrow. Why don't you call me on Friday and we can talk about it,
all right, I'll do that.
okay?
And Burgess, understand, Alan's got 38 cents of the first dollar he ever made. So keep that in mind when you start talking to him.
No, I know a little bit about him. I mean, he's the kind of guy who will buy an old cabin and fix it up himself.
Well, he'd rather have somebody give him an old cabin to fix up.
That's good. Anyway, I think we're doing fine. I didn't mean to scare you too much, but we'll get through this tough period.
Okay. Anybody have any further questions?
No, it looks like an A+ report to me.
All right. Thank you, Burgess. We appreciate that.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, item 5, Anna Parrish.
Well, you're not getting Anna, you're getting Dad. Anna's full name is Anna Klausner Parrish. We haven't met. I'm Bob Klausner. I'm the senior in the firm in more ways than one. Just because you don't know just a little bit about me, I've been doing this for 44 years, representing state and local government retirement plans. We represent over 200 of them throughout the United States, literally from the Virgin Islands all the way to American Samoa, and from Southern California to Alaska, and Alaska over to New England. So, and some of the stuff in the middle. So this is our specialty. And by the way, I'm from a Florida native. My family actually emigrated from Europe to Florida at the end of the 19th century. So they landed in Fernandina, and I grew up in Jacksonville, and so I'm well familiar with the beautiful city of Palatka. The only item I had for you is the summary plan description. As you'll see there, we're required by state law 112.66 Florida statutes to update this every other year. The only thing I really want to call your attention to, because the only changes we made were stylistic. Instead of saying he and or she, we just put they, because it's just easier. And but I'd like you to look at page 11 of 17, because I think this is important for our members. Right there, we see the underlining. There is a law in Florida that says if you got a divorce on or after July 1, 2012, any beneficiary designation that you made before that time is canceled by operation of law. And in fact, there was a recent case that I read as I read the weekly, appellate decisions in Florida, where the provisions of that statute actually overrode a plan provision in a private sector plan. So we should be sending a notice once a year. And I believe that I think we do. And if we're not, we should, because this was discussed with police and fire earlier today, to the member saying, look, if you got a divorce, check your beneficiary designation, because you either need to remake the old one or make a new one. And I'll tell you why that's actually important. There was, as I said, we do work all over the country. There was a case out of the state retirement system in Louisiana where the judge in one of the parishes Had been married for 35 years. He fell in love with his new judicial assistant, and he divorced Mrs. Judge, and he gave her everything: the house, the car, the dog, the children, whatever she wanted. But he said, you have to disclaim rights in my pension. And she said, okay, I'll disclaim my marital rights in your pension, because as I'm sure you're all aware, pensions are marital property, and it's presumed that it gets split, the value of it gets split between the parties to the extent that the job and the marriage covered the same period of time. So Mrs. Judge signs the bottom line, and Mr. Judge marries the young one, and he's just so happy it kills him. And he dies months after the wedding. So the tearful widow, number two, she shows up at the pension office and says, I'm here to collect my money. And the pension administrator looks at the file and says, well, I'm sorry, your name's not on here. Mrs. Judge number one is on here. And she says, oh, I got an answer for that. Here's my marital settlement agreement. And they said, yeah, well, the plan provision says it's the name of the designated beneficiary that gets the benefit. And so, of course, they notified wife number one, and she came to the pension office and ultimately to the pension board and said, she says, I know it's my money. He still loved me. He felt guilty about the divorce, and that's why he didn't change the form. He wanted me to have that money. And ultimately, the case ended up in the Supreme Court of Louisiana, and wife number one got it, because what Judge got in the divorce decree was the right to change the name, and he didn't bother to do it.
Well, so my question
Ask the
is,
dead
though,
guy.
in Florida, we have a qualified domestic relations order that's entered in most domestic cases.
Except that government plans don't have to follow a qualified domestic relations order. The term qualified domestic relations order actually comes from the Retirement Equity Act of 1984, which is part of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, or as they're known collectively, the Lawyers Relief Acts. And the specifics of that law say state and local government plans sponsored by an entity of state or local government are exempt from the provisions of this law. And actually, Florida courts have said so. It was a case out of Jacksonville involving their general employees retirement system on that very point, and one out of Orlando involving the police pension plan. So while it is still marital property, we don't have to follow them. Now, police and fire are actually prohibited by statute from honoring a quadro for reasons that would take too long at this hour of the day, and it's too boring to explain. But a non-public safety plan could, if it chose by ordinance to say, we're going to honor a quadro, but that would have to be essentially the city of Palatka's.
So
choice.
otherwise, then you're saying that if it's a municipal plan, the order from the court would have to direct the plan participant to make changes to the plan themselves after the divorce in order to carry out the intent of the final judgment.
What we've been doing to kind of solve this dilemma is we actually developed a model order, which has been accepted by all the circuit courts around Florida, which basically says member is directed to open a checking account with former spouse, and then says to the pension fund, electronically deposit my check into that account. And what happens is that the bank has a standing ACH, electronic transfer, to give the ex his or her, whichever one's not the member, his or her piece, or their, I guess, since we're eliminating his or her, to take their piece immediately out on a recurring basis. That way nobody cheats anybody. So that's actually the easiest way to do it, and we found that it solves the most problems. Unless the fund, you could, if you wanted, pay the ex directly, but you'd have to really amend the plan to expressly provide for that.
I
Now,
think
the reason I would say don't do that anymore, even if you could, I wouldn't, because after January 1 of 2019, alimony and child support aren't deductible anymore. And the part that goes, the property settlement part was always income to the member. And what should be happening in these divorces, and the divorce lawyers, a lot of them don't know this, should be adjusting the marital share to be net of taxes. Because think about it, if you got to split your pension and the 1099-Rs coming to you for the whole thing, you're going to be paying taxes on your piece, and you're going to be paying taxes on the piece that got given away. And so you want to make sure that if the net effect is 20%, that the marital share is lowered from 50 to 40, which is 20% of the amount, from 50 to 40, to make sure that you've got enough cash as the member to pay that other person's income taxes. You used to be able to give the other person a 1099, but you can't do that after January 1 of 19. So that's why I said these things are like lawyer relief acts, because there's like an endless amount of work that it lets us do. That's basically the only real substantive change that's in the plan. We listed all the laws that do apply to the plan after that. And so if you are okay with the draft of the SPD, a motion, I would suggest a motion is in order to adopt it as amended, and we'll send a finalized copy back to you.
Do we hear a motion?
Make a motion to accept the changes.
Second.
To adopt the plan as amended, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Well, that's my report. If you'd like me to keep talking about other stuff, I can, but it's late. So
I appreciate
I'm
it.
done.
You got a nice voice, but I'll pass on that if you don't mind.
thank you. I appreciate that. And you will see Anna at your next meeting. She had unexpectedly had a baby at home. She didn't deliver it today, but she ended up with one of her babies at home today. So Dad's filling in.
Absolutely. Well, you're right. We appreciate your firm's attendance, and we're happy to accept the advice of any representative of your firm.
Thank you.
Okay, so next would be quarterly expenditures. That's you, Miss Jill?
Yes, these are the quarterly expenditures. Well, actually, they're from October through June.
So you have a written summary in front of you, gentlemen, of the expenditures.
And also on that report is a number that is an estimate of the city contributions left in when the employee contribution was refunded. So just under $500,000 is the this year, what was left in the pension fund due to contributions.
Really?
Yes. That's why I thought it's significant enough to start putting that on these reports.
This is the amount that's in that the city contributed for an employee
Who never vested.
who never
and left-
vested
And left
Took their money out.
and took
Wow.
their money out. This year,
this year.
yes. Now
Wow.
that's on a 0.35 basis, which is this year's contribution. That's why it's estimated. You'd have to go to each year and figure it out, but that's a reasonable estimation.
Okay,
Retirement.
well, that'll, I'm sure that's already, that's probably already calculated into all their numbers though, so.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
why
I
it's
mean, we do assume a certain number of people terminate each year. That's what we did in that study we just talked about. But if it's more than a normal year, then that's a gain to the plan. Just depends on each year.
All right. Does anybody have any question about these? Looks like we're still solvent. Mr. Bush didn't take anything this quarter, so.
No, I didn't take it. I'll get it next quarter.
Alan, I kid you a lot, but nobody ever questioned your ability to keep track of the numbers.
I know where money is. You better believe it.
Okay, anybody, if nobody has a question about this, then I guess a motion to accept the report is in order.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Were you through, Brent, looking at it? I see.
I'm just glancing. I didn't
Yeah,
have any
okay.
questions.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Any public comments? I don't know if we're in Zoom land, if we got anybody from the public on or whatever, but. Okay. Alan, did Ruby Williams die? Who? Ruby Williams.
God, I hope not. I hadn't heard that. Have you?
Well, I saw a obit and I hooped it wasn't her, but I don't know.
I don't either. I thought Will Townsend died. You see that in the paper?
Bill,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Oh, she was in town buying plots, cemetery plots.
What was Will Townsend? Did he have some fatal disease? Or
No, Judy died the week before and I think Bill just
he
gave
just
up.
gave up with it, huh?
Okay, so any other business?
So she wants to talk about this trustees.
Who wants to trust about
The,
it?
the police and fire have a conference November 3rd through the 5th, which benefits everyone. It's not just police and fire. The information they give is valuable beyond police and fire. It is tailored toward their plans, but
Where will it be?
it's in Orlando. And the pension does pay for education to the board members and encourages them in the ordinances.
And the 3rd through 5th, I don't know what days those are or anything else. I'd have to-
It's a Wednesday through a Friday. And I know that on Friday, the 5th, there's going to be a brilliant lecture
So
about what's going on in America's courtrooms. Actually, 3 people from my office will be speaking at the conference. Bonnie Jensen will be speaking on Thursday, and Anna and I will be speaking on Friday. So we'd certainly welcome you be in there. It is initially geared to police and fire, so there will be some specifics about chapters 175, 185 Florida statutes, but there'll be a significant discussion about fiduciary duty, investment responsibilities under chapter 112, actuarial responsibilities, and all of those are universal to public plans in Florida.
Okay, thank you. We got a Florida League of Cities Legislative Conference that same time frame, and you got a board meeting that Thursday night. So, but we'll take a look at it, and I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, and we'll take a look at it. If you're paying, Alan may go. I don't know.
Well, if you're interested, just contact me because the registration's free, but the hotel rooms and such, I book.
One year I went just for one day and drove down and drove back home. So I might consider doing that again, because I do have other commitments.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you, Jill. Appreciate that. Is there anything else to come before the board? Gentlemen, do you have anything else?
Nope.
All right, thank you very much. Then we'll adjourn the meeting at this time, and appreciate everybody's participation and all the presentations and information that was provided. Looks like we're on track. Thank you.
Pleasure
Thank
to
you.
work with you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody.
Nice to see everybody.
Take care. Be safe.